What if the Vikings weren't purely Scandinavian? What if the genetic truth buried in modern Nordic DNA reveals that the legendary Norse warriors were far more diverse than anyone imagined? Recent breakthroughs in ancient DNA analysis are rewriting everything we thought we knew about Viking origins. In 2015, archaeologists excavating a Viking Age cemetery in Flakstad, Norway, unearthed a skeleton that would challenge centuries of assumptions. The burial was unmistakably Viking. The body lay in a boat grave surrounded by weapons, jewelry, and Norse artifacts. But when geneticists extracted DNA from the bones, they discovered something impossible according to traditional Viking narratives. This Viking warrior carried genetic markers indicating significant Southern European ancestry, with matches to populations from modern-day Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. This wasn't a captive or slave buried with dishonor. This was a high-status individual given full Viking burial rights. How did someone with Mediterranean genetics end up as a Viking in northern Norway? The answer required geneticists to completely reconsider what Viking actually meant. The term described not an ethnicity, but a lifestyle, a culture, and an economic activity. Anyone could become Viking if they adopted Norse culture and integrated into Scandinavian society. The genetic evidence was revealing that they did, in numbers far greater than anyone suspected. To understand Viking DNA, we must first explore Scandinavia's deeper genetic history. The first humans arrived approximately 12,000 years ago, following the retreat of Ice Age glaciers. These Mesolithic hunter-gatherers had dark skin, blue eyes, and genetic profiles linking them to populations across northern Europe. Dr. Mattias Jakobsen at Uppsala University has spent years analyzing ancient Scandinavian DNA. His research reveals that these early Scandinavians carried the genetic variant for blue eyes, but lacked the variants for light skin pigmentation that characterize modern Nordic populations. They would have looked strikingly different from modern Scandinavians. Around 6,000 years ago, Neolithic farmers from Anatolia migrated into Scandinavia, bringing agriculture and new genetic variants. The third major genetic component arrived around 5,000 years ago, the Yamnaya people from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These pastoralists brought Indo-European languages, horses, and bronze working technology. Modern Scandinavians inherit approximately 50% of their ancestry from these steppe herders, 30% from Neolithic farmers, and 20% from the original hunter-gatherers. This three-way mixture created the genetic foundation of Scandinavian populations. But the Viking Age would add another layer of complexity. The Viking Age began around 793 AD with the raid on Lindisfarne Monastery. For the next 3 centuries, Scandinavian seafarers explored, traded, raided, and settled across Europe, reaching as far as North America to the west and Constantinople to the east. Modern DNA analysis reveals the reality was far more complex than traditional narratives suggest. Vikings didn't just export themselves. They imported people, cultures, and genes back to Scandinavia on an enormous scale. Every raid brought captives. Every trading voyage created opportunities for intermarriage. Dr. Eski Villerslev at the University of Copenhagen led the largest Viking DNA study ever conducted, published in Nature in 2020. His team analyzed DNA from 442 Viking Age skeletons from across Europe. The results shocked even seasoned geneticists. The Viking Age populations showed far more genetic diversity than modern Scandinavians, with ancestry from Britain, Ireland, the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and even Central Asia. In Sweden, Viking Age burials showed individuals with British and Irish ancestry, constituting approximately 6% of the population. In Denmark, genetic signatures from the Baltics and Eastern Europe appeared frequently. Norwegian Viking Age sites revealed Mediterranean and Western European genetic markers. Viking raids across Europe brought thousands of captives back to Scandinavia. But genetic evidence reveals that many of these captives didn't remain slaves for generations. Instead, they integrated into Scandinavian society, married, and contributed their genes to the Nordic gene pool. Iceland provides the clearest example. Modern Icelanders carry approximately 60% Scandinavian ancestry, but 40% British and Irish ancestry. Dr. Agnar Helgeson's research at Decode Genetics in Iceland found that the British and Irish ancestry is asymmetric by sex. The mitochondrial DNA shows approximately 60% Irish and Scottish origins, while Y chromosome DNA is approximately 75% Scandinavian. This pattern suggests Viking men brought Celtic women to Iceland. Similar patterns appear across Scandinavia. Norwegian populations, especially in western coastal regions, show elevated Celtic genetic markers. Swedish populations in areas connected to Eastern trade routes carry Eastern European and even some Central Asian ancestry. Swedish Vikings ventured into Eastern Europe, establishing trade routes and founding cities like Novgorod and Kiev. They became rulers of Slavic territories, creating what would eventually become the Russian state. But genetic analysis reveals the Rus didn't maintain their Scandinavian genetic identity. Within a few generations, they became genetically indistinguishable from Slavic populations. Modern Russians show minimal Scandinavian genetic input, despite the historical prominence of Rus Vikings. Dr. Peter Underhill's Y chromosome studies found that Swedish Viking markers appear in Russian populations at less than 5%. The genetic evidence indicates the Rus were a small elite who quickly intermarried with Slavic populations. Several high-status Viking Age burials in Denmark and Sweden contain individuals with genetic profiles matching populations from modern Germany and northern France. The Frankish Empire bordered Viking territories. Trade, diplomacy, and warfare created constant contact. Frankish chronicles describe diplomatic marriages between Viking leaders and Frankish nobility. Genetic analysis confirms this exchange included people. Several Danish Viking Age individuals show genetic profiles indicating Frankish or Germanic ancestry. Some Swedish burials contain individuals with ancestry from Central Europe. These genetic signatures appear in high-status burials, suggesting these individuals held respected positions in Viking society. The Sami people, the indigenous population of northern Scandinavia, have a genetic profile that differs significantly from southern Scandinavian populations. They carry elevated levels of both European hunter-gatherer ancestry and a distinctive Siberian component, approximately 20 to 30% of Sami genetic makeup, linking them to populations across the Arctic. The relationship between Vikings and Sami involved trade, intermarriage, and sometimes conflict. Genetic analysis reveals some gene flow between populations. Dr. Karen Boys found that approximately 5% of modern Swedes carry detectable Sami ancestry, increasing to 20% or higher in northern Sweden. The famous Birka warrior grave, discovered in Sweden in 1880, contained a full set of weapons and 2 horses. For over a century, everyone assumed the occupant was male. Then, in 2017, DNA analysis revealed the warrior was female, suggesting female warriors existed in Viking society. Genetic analysis of Viking Age migration patterns reveals women traveled as much as men. Women buried in Scandinavian graves often grew up in Britain, Ireland, or Eastern Europe. In Iceland, the high percentage of Celtic maternal ancestry indicates substantial numbers of Celtic women became part of Viking society. The primary Scandinavian Y chromosome haplogroup is I1, found in approximately 40% of modern Swedish and Norwegian men. This haplogroup marks ancient Nordic ancestry. Vikings carried this haplogroup across Europe, where it appears today in regions they settled. But I1 isn't the only Scandinavian haplogroup. R1a, associated with Slavic populations, appears in Sweden at approximately 15%. R1b, dominant in Western Europe, appears in Norway at about 25%. The Scandinavian gene pool was diverse even before the Viking Age. Hemochromatosis, an iron overload disorder, appears at high rates in Scandinavian populations. The C282Y mutation reaches frequencies of 15% in Norway and Sweden. Researchers believe this mutation originated in Celtic populations and spread to Scandinavia through intermarriage. Lactose tolerance approaches 95% in Scandinavian populations, the highest rate globally. This trait provided enormous advantages in dairy-focused economies like Viking Age Scandinavia. Average modern Norwegians typically show 85 to 90% Scandinavian ancestry, with the remainder split between British Isles, 5 to 8%, and Western European, 2 to 4%. Swedes show 80 to 85% Scandinavian ancestry, 5 to 10% Finnish and Baltic ancestry, and 5 to 7% from Western and Central Europe. Danes often show the most diverse results, with 75 to 85% Scandinavian ancestry and higher percentages of Germanic, British, and French ancestry. The genetic evidence demolishes any notion of Viking purity. The Vikings were not a homogeneous Nordic population maintaining racial isolation. They were a multi-ethnic, multicultural confederation bound by language, culture, and shared activities rather than genetics. The Viking Age transformed Scandinavian genetics by incorporating populations from across Europe and beyond. The legendary Norse warriors included people with Celtic, Slavic, Mediterranean, and Baltic ancestry who adopted Viking culture and identity. Being Viking wasn't about genetics, it was about participation in a cultural system. Modern Scandinavians inherit this diverse legacy. Their DNA carries stories of ancient hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, steppe herders, Celtic captives, Slavic traders, and Mediterranean travelers, all mixing over millennia to create the Nordic populations we know today.